So I thought I'd start out with some basics and make sure we've got some things that we want to cover for sure, and that's, what is the scientific name for chicken? If you don't know, it's Gallus newborn. Most of you are going to tell me you know all these, so I'm going to go through these real quick. Male chicken, rooster. When we examine the egg itself, I think this was talked about a little bit. Candling, very good. What's the castrated male? Everybody knew the rooster. It's capon. Yeah. Hens are used for laying eggs. It's a layer. Chickens are grown for meat production, broilers. I actually spent several years working for OK Foods on the eastern part of the state, so I do have some experience in a lot of the things that were presented in the last day or so. Group name, chickens, how about a flock? Flock of chickens, yeah. And that nest of egg is a clutch, so that was talked about. All right, so let's talk about the egg type hens. What are the characteristics we're looking for? So they've got a show here. I knew that was going to be happening, so I didn't know what kind of audience I would have here, but I was expecting maybe some kids as well, so that's kind of, you guys had to deal with me going through the terms there. So the bleaching of the yellow pigment of the shanks and the feet is kind of one of the things the judges look for. We hold judging contests, when they have 4 chickens in front of them and say, okay, this one's better than this one and so forth. They actually want those chickens' shanks to be more bleached out. So what they're doing is pulling from their body and going to egg production. Okay, that makes sense. Condition of the plumage, the rate of the molting, vigor and vitality, head characteristics. They talked about the comb shape, right? If it doesn't look like what the breed is supposed to be, that's going to be one of those things that a judge will look at. So the vent was talked about, some terms. I think it was Ryan yesterday had a shirt on, and one of the other speakers talked about the American Poultry Association, and they had a little bone structure on there. What was the name of that? It's 2 bones you pull apart. What's that called? The wishbone. All right, the scientific name, or anatomy and physiology, is called the furcula. So if you don't learn anything else from me, it's 2 names for the wishbone. The furcula is the other one.
My students are still working on that.
Okay, good. All right, so there's a lot of things we need to know about talking about a bird, and knowing the structure is a good thing to know. Okay. All right, so I think the factors that kind of dictate whether an animal or a chicken has different pigment is going to be determined on sometimes how you feed the animal, what you feed any animal. Okay, so I'm throwing animals, cattle, livestock, anything, chickens, I'm throwing it all in the same category here. So a pigment returns to the body parts in the same order that it fades away. So if a chicken is producing a lot of eggs, it bleaches out. Well, once you start decreasing egg production, it's going to come back to that yellow color again. Okay. So health and vitality of the hen. How do you know? He said depressed. I like that. It's like 3 days before they're being shipped. That's depressing in itself. And chasing the chicken, I think a Rocky movie was he had to chase the chicken. He knew he was ready to go fight, wasn't he? So these are signs that we can tell. So that vitality of that chicken is going to be based on maybe how they come to you every day. If you're throwing out hen scratch, all right. So observations are, if that one's kind of slow to come to you, you may want to keep an eye on that one bird. All right. So what physically, when we look at the vent, what is that judge looking for to know if it's a good layer or not? Okay, so this is one thing. If the judges go out there and watch them doing the shows, they may look at this. Or in our judging contest, the kids actually pull the birds out of the cages and look at them. This is one of the areas they're going to look at in the vent. So comparison of the color skin around the vent, a poor layer on the left versus the one on the right is a good layer. Okay. He talked about the ear. The chickens have ears, so there's the earlobe up here. And then the eye ring. And, the eyelids themselves, that was always something that always freaked me out too, because I knew they could like come out of a deep sleep and you'd see all three eyelids, versus one that you can see on a daily basis that may not be as big an issue for you. The beak, what do we notice about the one on the left versus the one on the right? So the yellow coloring on the tip of the beak is usually one that has a little more of a pore layer, so it's not producing as many eggs, versus the one on the right. We don't see much yellow at all, do we? Okay. So here's the shanks, or as me and Barry were driving together, we were talking about different structures, and paws is what we called it in the industry. There's a big demand in some countries for paws, right? And so,
They're delicious.
okay. Photographs showing the loss of pigment from the one on the right having had many eggs versus the one on the left has had few eggs. Okay, so typically you guys have backyard poultry. These shanks are going to be probably a little bit more yellow colored. Sunlight dictates some of that coloring as well, and so it may not be as easy to observe as, say, in the commercial industry. So capacity or condition of the abdomen, again, what are the judges looking for on a laying hen? All right, so I don't know how this next slide, the pictures are going to show up, because it's something I need to maybe go out and find some examples and do a better job of what I've got in front of me there. But typically we want them to be wide and on the abdomen part, and then the pelvic bones are thin and flexible. The vent is moist and large and oblong in shape, so that's what you're looking for. If they're narrow, they're just not have that ability to produce the egg structures that we're normally going to want to have in the cartons, the grade A eggs. So the way that judge is going to use his fingers, and that's his measuring stick. And so instead of having a ruler, he's using his fingers to feel that chicken and determine if it's two widths apart or is it three. And then he puts his hand the other way across section of the back end of the chicken, and that determines whether it's a good layer or not. Okay, so everybody's going to go out and feel their own chickens now later on today, right? All right, so what do we see in these two chickens? So this is kind of the quiz. Which one on the right? Not as good a layer? Okay, that's the good layer. Okay. So again, we do see some differences in the coloring of the structures. So physically going out there, seeing some signs, you're the best defense of seeing different maybe nutritional deficiencies and so forth. Plumage, this is probably why are my chickens not laying eggs, was what I was going to guess on Dr. Clark's presentation of his number one call, and it was high on the list, at least higher than the disease. But a lot of times I'll ask this as a follow-up question: what do your birds look like? Are they molting? All right. So, two factors considered in appraising the plumage of hens includes the condition of the feather appearance and the molting rate or speed of shedding. We want them to shed and go through a molt fairly quickly. That usually means that they're under good nutrition. Okay. Judges will look at everything, I think, is what you said, wasn't it, Christine? And so they're definitely going to open that wing up and see if they've got all the feathers and in good condition. So they're going to look at what they call the primaries, which are the numbered ones, and then the secondaries and the axil feather there that's in the middle, you see, kind of separates those two. Okay. So again, this is just a picture, handwritten, hand-drawn, compared to the one in the previous slide to kind of tell you how to look for the differences. All right, so vigor and vitality. A high-producing hen appears vigorous, alert, and quick in movement. So everything Dr. Clark talked about, if you can catch a chicken, it's probably not as healthy as you want it to be. If you're the one gasping for air, then maybe not so much. All right, head and head parts. If a hen's beak is short, the hen's eyes are bright and alert and round, usually those are the ones that we typically see as healthy chickens. Non-producing hens, their eyes are kind of dull and sleepy. they just don't get around quite as much as we'd like to see. And of course, I don't know what your experience is, Christine, but age, does that impact? Some of them still could be fine, but an older hen may not get around quite as quickly as a young pullet, okay? Right. So I'm not going to go through many of the parts. Again, like I said, I didn't know what to expect as an audience, and maybe some youth might be interested in this presentation to take home as their 4-H project and maybe learn the parts of the chicken as well. So, all right, so they talked about it. Here's at least a slide telling you the differences in the different combs. So we've got a single comb, a buttercup comb, the V-shaped comb, and that's probably going to be one of those fancy chickens out there, right? The pea comb, rose comb, cushion comb. You can see there's different breed characteristics, and that can help you distinguish between the breeds. So maybe I didn't quite get as big a range as Dr. Clark did. Either 104 to 107 is what I pulled out of the literature. What we put down, so I may have to go back and recorrect my slide here, but
variation among birds.
Yep. So looks like to me I've come up with a very similar heart rate and respiration rates, so I think we're good there. And just the old expression is know what's normal, and then you'll know what's unnormal, I guess. All right, so nutrition, that's what I was told to talk about, and I figured you guys have already gotten your $20 worth on these last 2 days. I'm just a bonus to this thing. So nutrition is my background. It's more in cattle, but to me, I've got my nutrition books on every species. That's what I go off of. And I am going to show you a quick spreadsheet to maybe take home and play around with. So what building block on the screen am I missing? Which one's kind of covered up? It's the green one in the background. It was talked about today.
Phosphorus.
Okay, you say phosphorus? No? What do they need every day? Probably water, thank you. Yep, they need water. So that would be one of my key points when we're in the commercial industry. If those birds are drinking water, they're eating. Okay, so water is a critical one. We shouldn't forget about it. Types of feeds, and what I wanted to say about this is that which one of those do you think a young bird will eat easily? And so they usually talk about chicken feed in starter, grower, or a finisher or layer type diet. Okay, so our starter is going to be in these kind of crumbles shaped. Okay. And just like Christine talked about, when you buy a commercial feed, sometimes if you throw that on the ground, it's a great question, but the type of feed ingredients we use in those, they do just kind of dissipate and go away. And so most crumbles are in a form where they can be fed through a feeder, but you could also put them on the ground, but you want to make sure that they can get access to it. One of the things we want to make sure a baby chick gets is water and then feed as early as they can. Okay, so a lot of times what we do with commercial is actually put a layer of paper down. Okay, they actually come in crates of 100 to commercial growers, and they're lined in paper so their feet don't fall through the crates. Okay, so they're used to paper from basically hour number one. So if you put that paper, they're kind of attracted to it, and so if you put a little feed on there, you've kind of known that they've gotten access to feed right away. Anybody ever bought chicks out of a hatchery? Is there any material in there that's got like green? Yeah, so it's a little, Dr. Clark, what do they call that? It's a gel pack.
Is the product name. It's a combination. It's keep them hydrated.
Exactly. Yep.
A lot of times the turkey industry may use green paint sprinkles put on the feed. My grandmother used to use just like whole oatmeal, sprinkling that on the feed with contrast. Yeah.
So pellets are typically a ration that we'll feed when they're, say, somewhere between 14 and 35 days of age. And then from that point on, they kind of go on to a finisher diet in the broiler industry. Okay, so we start with the crumbles. A grower is usually going to be in a pellet form, and then you've got a finisher layer diet or a mash, sometimes referred to as a mash, or scratch. All right, it looks more like scratch material. What's our two main feed ingredients that we typically have in that final one? Corn, ground up corn, isn't it? Yeah, and soybean meal, okay? So he talked about one that we don't usually see in most poultry diets, and that's cottonseed meal because of the gossypol. What about milo, Dr. Clark? Have you ever heard of anybody feeding milo?
Yes, they use milo. Grain sorghums are being used as go in there and cut back on some of the corn.
Okay, so the problem with milo though is it can become cheap and they'll use it as a grain source to replace corn. Okay, what color is the breast meat? When you use milo, sometimes it'll get little spots on it and it'll look like chicken pox. So is that very appealing to when you go to the grocery store? So a lot of nutritionists kind of stay away from milo a little bit. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that physical look to it. Okay. So just like earlier talked about, starters, what do you think we're looking at on that feed tag though? What's the one feed ingredient or descriptor up there that we're kind of concerned about? Crude protein. Yeah, they require, because they're growing fast, need to build their structure. Typically, we have crude protein being one of the highest requirements. So this one showing the requirements are 24% crude protein, lysine at 1.3%. So this is the requirements. And we typically talk about energy in kcals per metabolic energy per kilogram. So that's what my book is. It's always in metric. And a lot of times when we talk to producers, they'll think of it in pounds, but we're metric. All right, so if we look at that, are we meeting that bird's requirement off that tag right away with crude protein that I talked about? So in the yellow box, we've got a requirement of 24. And we're at 20, aren't we? So we are deficient in crude protein, so that doesn't mean that it's a bad ration. It just means that maybe they need to go out and forage for something else and pick up some other protein. Maybe the bugs have some protein in it, right? Okay. Just know what's on the feed tag in a lot of ways. So we got a 20% here. The crude protein on this grower finisher is 15% lysine. Minimum of 0.65%. So again, we're a little bit deficient on some of these in these examples that I'm using. Okay. Finisher layer. See, notice that our crude protein is going down, and we're going from a 20% or better on that baby chick to a finisher where we can get away with somewhere between 14 to 18%. Energy feeds, real quick, you guys have already mentioned it. What are we most concerned? What do we feed the most of? And corn is the one feed ingredient. So can we feed whole corn? We sure can. Probably don't want to feed 10 pounds of it and expect them to clean it up, right? But they'll chew through that pretty well. Most people want to have it cracked, and it's just easier for the birds to peck at and eat that feed ingredient. So notice that on whole corn, we typically see on a feed tag, we'll see crude protein. We have no idea what the energy content is. It's not required by law to be on the feed tags. And so corn is our highest energy source though. Okay. How about alfalfa pellets? You're always going to pay more when there's a horse on the picture of the bag, right? But we can feed chickens alfalfa pellets. And why would we? What's alfalfa or any forages? You got backyard poultry, they're out foraging, right? What is it high in? What one ingredient?
Protein.
It's high in protein typically. I'd agree with that. What about calcium? All right. Do we need to worry about calcium in laying birds? Yeah. So alfalfa is a good feed ingredient to use, and sometimes, I don't know if anybody watched the Purdue commercials where they're feeding them oregano and what have you. All right. They do say that a little bit amounts of alfalfa seems to have a calming effect on birds as well. So I don't know how do you distinguish between hyperbirds and calm birds, but it's one of those things that have been talked about. Okay. Oyster shells, everybody in here has probably fed that, right? Or show of hands, everybody? Okay. Anybody tried to do it in a self-feeder? Okay. My grandpa, I grew up on a farm in Iowa. He always had some kind of self-feeder, and he just made sure there was oyster shells in it. So if you didn't think that that starter ration had enough calcium in it, maybe the birds would go and get their own calcium and supplement what they needed. Okay. It's pretty small expense in feed ingredient, but look at the calcium level. What was the calcium level on alfalfa? Like 1%? Yeah. And we're at 38%, so they don't have to eat a lot to make a quick improvement. All right, so with that said, feeders, you can throw it on the ground. They've made all kinds of improvements on the feeders, the feeder types, and what are we trying to really do there?
Reduce waste.
Exactly, reduce waste. And so you'll see some of these feeders like here that are limiting access. They can still peck at it, but they just can't, just waller it around and kick it on the floor. Okay, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Most of the times we can find feeders like the one you see on the left through places like NASCO magazine. The one on the right, those are going to be your commercial feeder type operations. Okay, so they've got a 20-ton bin of feed out there in the outside the barn, and then it's delivering it along these feed lines. Water, I've only got a couple more slides here. We can provide basically free choice water. I don't know if your level here is going to get a chicken to keep from drowning on that, but that's interesting that you had that experience. I do know these were popular early on. They kind of fill up as a float, and so that one would have a little more depth. I would be kind of hesitant on baby chicks, like you said. They could sure get wet in those. The ones on the right are going to be what we typically see in the commercial industry now. And so on day one, we want to make sure there's a little cup of water in there, that we've got water to start the birds off, but then they learn how to just peck at that nozzle, and they get the water dripping down into their gullet. Okay, so this is kind of day one. That's exactly like what you see here on the right. As that bird gets older, you kind of want to have it at a height where it's at a 45-degree angle for them. Okay. Day one, you're still a little bit kind of eyesight. You want to make sure they almost bump into it a little bit sometimes. So if they bump into it, water sprays out on them and they know where the water source is. So as they get bigger, it's just more efficient. And why do we do that? Less waste again, just like in the feed deal. They keep them cleaner. And a lot of times, really this little attachment here is for day one and maybe day 3. And we really don't want that anymore, because you get water standing there, what happens to it? You got dust from the environment. You just got that cleanliness thing that we've all been talking about here. So a lot of times we have to flush the lines, clean those out, every batch. That's what they're working on. The growers that do well take care of the little things. Okay. All right, water intake. This is kind of my experience working in the industry. We knew how many birds were in those barns, how much. They actually have monitors now to see how much on the controllers, how much water they do consume. And so in week 1, a barn full of chickens would have somewhere around 17 gallons of water per day. Okay, so as they get older, they're drinking lots of water. Okay, and that's per 1,000 birds mixed sex breeds, I guess. That's what that is. All right, so let's talk about my nutrition spreadsheet. I went online, searched everywhere. I couldn't ever find one that was very good, that brings it home to a backyard poultry operation. And so I've with the help of some of my other area specialists, we've come up with this poultry ration calculator. And what was it, 2 days ago, we actually put it online, JJ. So maybe you got information for this conference on that website. It's called backyardchickens.okstate.edu. And right here, if you'll click on that, you can download this program and play around with it. So I'm done with the PowerPoint part of it. We'll just walk through a little bit of the nutrition program. Most nutrition programs are based on two things: your feed list, and then the actual program where you want to kind of compare feed stuffs. Okay, so the first thing I did was go into my feed list, and you'll notice that there's some blank spots, but there's already feedstuffs listed. Okay, so I could use alfalfa pellets or alfalfa meal if I wanted to. I threw in number 3 there, a commercial layer pellet. All right. And I don't know if these prices are accurate today or not. I've been working on this program a little bit. I don't remember exactly when I started and think I'm ready to throw it out to the public. But let's just say it is somewhere around that $13, and it comes in a 50-pound bag. That's normally what you'd go to the store and buy, right? So you can put that information in this program, whatever feed company you were talking about earlier. You can enter those into any one of these that are empty. Okay, so you'll notice that I've got some spots in here for empty spaces. So whatever feed diet you want to put in there. Probably the problem you're going to find out having is, where can I come up with this metabolizable energy in kcals per gram? Okay, that is not on the feed tags. May have to send that off to a lab to find that information out, or ask the companies if they'll provide that for you. Okay. So now that you know a little bit about where to put the feedstuff ingredients in, how can we use this? So if I'm using that 100% commercial layer pellet, meaning that that's all I'm feeding my chickens, basically down here in green it's showing you that same ration. So if I wanted to feed that commercial layer diet, say 50% of that and 50% corn, it changes it, doesn't it? So what did I do to my price? I cheapened it up a lot, didn't I? Okay, and I'm at 32.35 kcals. Did you notice that? Okay, corn is got a lot of energy, so that makes a lot of sense. So how do I know if I'm meeting the bird's requirements? Below this line of information is the requirements. So brown eggs versus white eggs, they actually do. It's kind of like a longhorn cow versus a Holstein cow. They do have different production guidelines, and they do have different maintenance requirements. Okay, so there is a little bit of difference, other than, you know, when we eat the eggs, there's not a lot of difference, is there? But there is some differences in the breeds. All right, so if we were talking about a layer and it's in that first 0 to 6 weeks, and it's a white egg-laying type bird, we needed it to have at least 2,850 calories of energy requirement, and our calcium level's at 0.9. So if we went above, we noticed that we were providing well above what that chicken needed with a 50-50 mix. Okay, so some of you want to cheapen up a ration. This is one way to test it. Just see if you want to put Milo or whatever feed ingredients you want to put in there, and at different percentages, and it's just a tool to use. Okay, so any questions? Anybody ever heard of Ecstasy Eggs years and years ago? It was a company that was feeding flax in their diet to their chickens, and they were marketing as Ecstasy Eggs, meaning that it was high in omega-3 fatty acids. That's why you would want to feed that ingredient. Now, if you feed, say, 25% of the ration in flaxseed, there is an association with that feed ingredient that causes a kind of a fishy taste, okay? And also a laxative effect on those birds, okay? So too much of one good thing can be a problem. So when I started working for the Kerr Center, they wanted me to sell that kind of egg as well. And the company that had the Okstate eggs, I called them up to see if I could get their diet. Well, I could get their diet for like $10,000. So I wasn't going to do that. I went and tried to figure out and play around with the percentages, figure out where that taste went away in some of my problems. So yeah, you can use flax. Just make sure you might want to consult with a nutritionist on those kinds of things a little bit more. I think I come around with somewhere around 10% was the maximum level of flax. But
it's getting pretty expensive to use flax.
and it is, because where is it grown? It's not grown very many places, and usually it's like North Dakota is about one of the few states, Canada, that actually produces flax. Okay. Yes, it is, and that's one of the reasons. It's not grown very many places, and so it is expensive. The problem is with, I don't know, University of Arkansas, do you want to plug them on their feed analysis? They've got a lab, I'm sure. Yeah.
I would start with your diet and just send it to the nutritionist. I got a call just the other day, and I went to our nutritionist and said, this is what they're using.
Yep.
I'm one of those kind that doesn't come out of the bag. I can't really help you a whole lot.
Yeah.
He's going to look at it and balance it out and see if it would be nutritionally sound. His initial thought was it felt like too low protein.
Yeah, and that's what I would do. Now, if you want to actually get it sent off to a lab, make sure that lab can do the things that you want it to do. Because a lot of our labs, like I'll just say OSU, we send a lot of hay samples in. They're used to those kind of samples, something like this, and you want fat content. Our lab doesn't offer that service, but I do know of other labs that will offer that service. So always consult with extension people and they'll help you. To me, the commercial feeds do a really good job of balancing a ration to try and keep people out of problems that we talked about the last day or so. You know, if an animal's balanced, has a balanced ration, usually we hardly see any of the problems we ever talk about. And so if that feed ingredient has enough calcium in it, meets the requirements, then the oyster shells may not be needed. And so my first thought is to balance the ration. If you need extra, to me it's so simple to go ahead and have a free choice location where you normally feed your birds anyway. My guess is, just like anything else, you want to be consistent. So don't let it be out there one day and then it be empty for a month, that kind of thing.